Hello, everybody. I think we're having a few people joining us. So thank you to everyone who's joining us so far. So Heledd will be talking about some key areas to consider. So when planning for later life, she's got over 15 years experience in this field. So obviously we're really grateful for her to give some of her time. So while we wait for a few more attendees to come in, I'll just talk a little bit more about some of these that we've done already. So this is the fifth of our series of webinars. Some of you may have attended some of our earlier ones. So we've had things such as sustainable investing, how to maximise income through the construction of your portfolio. We've had one on AIM, inheritance tax and business relief. We've had quite a few different ones and there will be some more coming up. So if anyone's interested in looking at some of the webinars that we've done already, then they're all on our website. Anyone that I've not met before, and I know I've met a few of you, seeing some names that I recognise up there, but anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Coreena Dutton. I'm an independent financial advisor for Integrity365. So I'm quite passionate about making sure that everyone gets, the right advice, and it's one of the key areas for me is later life planning. So recently I've done my SOLA training, which is the Society of Later Life Advisors accreditation, which focuses on getting the right advice to people in later life. And recently, you may or may not be aware that there's been quite a few announcements from the government about potential changes in legislation to care funding legislation. So I thought now would be a good opportunity to get an expert in and share some, some knowledge about this crucial area of planning. So Heledd, if you're happy, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to come and talk about all this sort of stuff because I think it's hard, isn't it? It's hard stuff to think about. People don't want to think about this and it's all very depressing. It's all very miserable. But I think for me, and I know, Coreena, we've talked about this quite a lot, it is that planning. It's about getting it right early. So you're not putting yourself or your loved ones in a position where life actually becomes unnecessarily difficult. So so I'm going to do a sort of a bit of a brief canter through some practicalities, some of the things that people should be thinking about, some things that people don't want to think about but probably ought to, and some things that have been cropping up recently, and really happy to take questions. I think that's really nice to get people's feel for what they're up to.
Absolutely.
So I think later life stuff it is, as you say, it's important. We're all getting that, it's all happening to all of us. I always say that, when I first started training, I was very much a case of, trained that people would just drop down dead and you just did all your tax planning and did all your sorting, and that was quite straightforward. And so as when I started my career 15 years ago, it's terrifying. But it's very much like, actually it's quite straightforward. You just get your will in place, sorted, not a problem. So actually what I'm noticing, and what a lot of us have been noticing, and I think Coreena, as you say, SOLA is really pushing this, is this later life stuff, is this actually people perhaps aren't living well long term, aren't dropping down dead to be sort of crude about it, and actually that has a pretty big impact on everything, quite frankly. So what I'm going to talk about is basically, I'm a lawyer, so I do legal stuff. Sounds obvious, but actually it's really understanding that where I can come in and add value to support and complement what you guys are doing. And really, ultimately, we've got people at the core of all this, and is getting them the right advice, the right paperwork, so that when these difficult scenarios do crop up, it's very much a case of actually we've got the toolkit. So if I work backwards, so if we are thinking about this sort of notion that people, when somebody dies, what happens? So please do pick up on Coreena's offer to look at the inheritance tax planning side of things, because that is really important. Not something to touch upon tonight particularly, but inheritance tax is often a consequence of death, and really this is where your will is going to be a really useful tool. Setting up your will properly, setting up your will in a way that is tax efficient, that moves the money in the right direction, is a massive bonus. So a lot of people, have this notion, oh, it's fine, it's, well, if I die, everything will be sorted, everybody's going to be okay. And it's not, because if you die without will, you die with what's called intestate, and the government and the law is pretty strict. It says, sorry, if you don't have a will, then there is one way and one way only that the money is going, and it very much goes down the bloodline. So if you're married, yeah, that can help. There's money can pass that way. Other than that, it goes down the bloodline, and you might sit there and go, well, hang on, I've got elderly parents, or I might have children, or I might actually I don't have children, and I don't, money's going to disappear off down some sort of distant cousins that I've never heard of. And we've seen it happen, that people have gone, yeah, it'll be fine, don't worry. They've died. One scenario we had was husband and wife were getting divorced. Divorce hadn't finished. He died very suddenly, and she had a massive inheritance, leaving his family without anything because they hadn't done the will. So, I know that people don't want to think about dying, but actually, if you're sitting down and going, do you know what do I want my legacy to be? Do I want to be able to say, look, I've put everything in place that I can, I've put the money in the right direction, everybody's going to be looked after, and everybody knows where the money is, where it's going, and that's fine. Plus, actually, there's loads of things you can do to make sure it's tax efficient. So looking at things like, if you want to give gifts to charity, that can be really helpful. Making sure you take advantage of any sort of business property relief that there might be. So really understanding what you've got, financially, and what that knock-on effect is down the line, and making sure, you maximise any benefits that you might get. So I think really important, if you haven't done your will, please do think about doing one. If you have done one, my rule of thumb is, check it every 5 years, or life events. So it's birth, marriage, death, divorce, lottery winnings. Anything big happens to you or your nearest and dearest, actually that's a really good time to look at your will. So for example, we will say to people, oh, it's all fine and it's all going well, but what we then find out that perhaps a child is going through a divorce. And we say, well, actually, let's be honest, the last thing you want to do at the moment is perhaps inadvertently give a massive cash injection to a divorcing child. Oh, yeah, because then you can see how it goes out of the family. If you've got children or grandchildren who've got perhaps learning difficulties or learning disabilities, the last thing perhaps they need is to have a cash injection, because it might have a knock-on effect on benefits. So there are definitely things to look at and consider what is the right way of structuring things. We always get the phone call going, I've got a simple will, that's all I want. And I go, okay, well, let's talk about actually what you've got. Right, the last thing you need is a simple will, because your life is anything but simple. And I think that's a big important thing to think about. And I think we're seeing people are finding that they've got property that's gone up hugely in value, and then suddenly there's a tax consequence. You're finding that people have got unusual or unhappy family relationships. And making sure that everything is then structured in that way is quite important. Also, really good way of making sure that everything's okay with care fees, which we'll touch upon as well, is making sure that your wills are set up in a way that's actually care fee efficient. Essentially, when somebody dies, they can do what they want with their money, but there's a way of making sure that your surviving spouse is well looked after, but doesn't really stop them having the lifestyle that they want. So there's definitely ways of looking at wills and structuring your wills that isn't just necessarily, right, I'll give everything to my husband and then hope for the best, and I'll give it to kids and I'll hope that there's no problems there. So increasingly rarely are we seeing people going, actually it is straightforward. So wills are a really good place to start thinking about, actually, is everything right? Is it going in the right direction? Am I doing it in the most efficient way possible? And am I giving my family as much protection as I can? And I think, that's a really good place to start. If you're doing, thinking about nothing else, it's that, what do I want my legacy to be? I've worked hard all my life. I've done all this investing and all this, building up of my assets. Why just, throw that away for the sake of, spending some time and sitting down and talking about a will? So I think, that's death. That's fine. Tick, move on. What we then need to look at is actually that sort of later life stuff, is that point at which you sit there going, okay, well, somebody's getting older, or they're getting more infirm, and in a again, slightly crude fashion, death's quite easy, because you can't be sort of part dead. You are dead or you are not. People who get unwell or have long-term and life-limiting conditions, it's a lot harder to work out what needs to be done. So again, sort of saying that, when I started my career, it was very much, well, people drop dead, and I think that at the time, I was reading something that said, we used to have 3 ages. It was childhood, adulthood, old age. We are now having a 4th one of extreme old age. And this extreme old age is something that we are seeing coming through with people who perhaps, and genuinely seen this from my own sort of family perspective, who genuinely thought that they were going to drop down dead in their 70s, and have now find themselves in their late 80s and a bit puzzled by life. And they've gone, hang on, but my parents died. These people in their 80s go, my parents died, I never had to look after them, and suddenly I'm finding myself being more frail, more in need of care and support. It's not something they're familiar with. So again, we're perhaps talking about the next generation down again. It is talking to that entire family generation and going, right, look, how do we structure what that later life stuff looks like? Planning is much easier than crisis management. Planning for later life is much easier than having a phone call and going, well, dad's had a stroke, dad's in hospital with a broken hip, and they're trying to check him out, and we don't have any paperwork, and everybody's clamoring for free of the bed, and there's only one care home available, and we have to move there, and it's going to cost us £2,000 a week. That's no fun. That really is no fun for anybody, because that's just a whole can of worms. You've got the emotional stress, you've got the financial stress, and you've got the lack of legal paperwork can actually have really quite a big impact. So one of my big sort of things I really sort of go on about is going, right, if you're going to do your will, you absolutely need to do a power of attorney. You absolutely need to get it in place, and get it in place early. What's a power of attorney? It's you choosing people that you trust to work with you and on your behalf if you either lose capacity because you may have a degenerative illness like dementia. Extreme example, you might be in a coma, in which you definitely are going to really struggle to communicate what's going on. And who can step into your shoes? Who can step into your shoes to make sure that things are okay? Sometimes you sit there and go, we're looking at families and go, well, my husband did all that for me, but he's now the one who's ill. But he's the one with all the bank accounts. Okay, well, we can't access it. So powers of attorney come in 2 flavours. There's a property and finance one, which does absolutely deal with what it says, which is deals with your property. So that's your house or houses, and your finances. So that's your savings, that's your investments, that's all that sort of stuff that just keeps the wheels moving. So having a power of attorney in place that allows somebody to step up and give you a ring, Coreena, and go, hi, dad's had a fall, I know you manage his finances and I know he's in good hands, so I've got the power of attorney, and you can then continue that dialogue. So huge benefit to everybody to be able to sit there and go, look, it just doesn't things don't cease.
Crucial.
Yeah. And then the other type of power of attorney is a health one. So again, are you comfortable that if you are unwell and you can't speak for yourself or voice your opinion, that there is somebody who's going to be an advocate for you and say, look, this is the treatment this person wants, or this treatment they don't want. And I think that's equally as important, understanding that, you know, people may not want to be resuscitated, or they may not want to have blood transfusions, or they may not want to take the antibiotics because, you know, they'd rather just, you know, call it quits. And actually having somebody who can have that dialogue is really important. So, you know, if you're sitting down and thinking, you know, well, I'm going to get my affairs in order, and I'm going to get my toolkit of stuff that makes my life easier, or makes the life of my loved ones easier, then these two things are really important. And I think it's also a really important thing to just check, if you've got, even if you've got these documents in place, just have a look at them occasionally and go, have I got the right people making the right decisions? So there's a natural inclination for people to perhaps, you know, just automatically use children, but you might have a child who's like a fantastic financial whiz, who'd be like totally have no emotion about health issues, and you'll have somebody else who's got a really emotional intelligence, and actually between them, giving them the right job can be really important. So, and again, I think it's really important, if you are doing powers of attorney, is understand who the key players are. So it's not just, you know, well, I've given you the job and stuff it in the cupboard. It's like, actually, who, you know, who's your financial advisor, who's your accountant, who's your lawyer, what is it you want to happen or don't want to happen if you lose capacity to be able to voice that opinion. And it's so much more than just a bit of paper. And I think this is really important, that you've got this sort of aspect of you're giving people responsibility to make decisions on your behalf. Do they know what is expected of them? Do they know what is required? Do they know that, you know, that you're there managing their you've been managing the investments all these years? And, you know, so it is a really good opportunity to just open that dialogue, have the conversations going along, and, you know, making sure it's okay. Another really important point with powers of attorney, for anybody who's thinking about making them, or they've got them tucked away in the cupboard, is just checking whether there's a slightly technical and slightly boring aspect to this, but it's really important, and, you know, that there's an authority in there to allow your attorneys to use discretionary fund management. It might not seem like a big thing, but actually it's all the difference between
very big thing, yeah.
All the difference between you guys being able to carry on as you were managing the finances, rather than every time you're trying to make a decision, trying to get some instructions. And it's really important that checking out those documents, or making sure that those documents are drawn up now, that's in there. So powers of attorney, really important things, really important bits of paper, and almost, and, you know, slightly contradicting myself, you know, you think, well, a will, you're not going to be there, and that's not going to affect you. A power of attorney is while you're alive, and that is really going to affect you if it means that somebody can't make decisions about where you live, or can't access your pension, and can't access your bank accounts, and causing grief down the line. So personally, get the lot, just get the suite of documents, get them in place, get everybody on board and understanding, you know, what's where's everything sorted. Have a black book of contacts, and, you know, go from there, because I think, you know, that is going to be a massive impact on all of us, you know, whether we are considering our own future or the future of our, perhaps, you know, more elderly, more vulnerable relatives. These things will take the heat out of difficult conversations at the time. And, you know, if we think about this sort of, we're you know, we're getting older, but we're living longer, but we're not necessarily living well and longer. That's going to have a knock-on effect. I mean, dementia is a particularly, you know, a difficult one, because dementia comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it affects everybody differently, and people can fluctuate, and people can have dementia for decade plus. You know, it's a terminal illness, but actually it's, how long is it going to take to pan out? And I was reading something sort of cropped up the other week, that when you've got somebody, and it's with the Alzheimer's, so Dr. Alzheimer's, when he sort of first diagnosed it, you can track basically in reverse exactly how it works if you've got a toddler or a baby. So you can go, if any of you don't have children, and you'll sit there and go, well, you know, a newborn can't sit up, can't hold its head up, can't feed itself, can't look after itself, but you know, rapidly they get to the point where they, you know, they move, they're standing up, they're sitting up, they're standing, they're crawling, they're walking. You know, they get to the stage where they can choose their clothes. They might not choose the most appropriate clothes, but they can choose, you know, what they want to wear. And only when they get to about 8, and on this chart, it's, you know, when they get to the age of about 12, they are technically able to hold down a job and technically able to manage money. Alzheimer's works in reverse. So you start to lose the ability to do that sort of understanding of the finances stuff and understanding how that works. And then as the illness progresses, you'll find people can't really manage to, you know, to dress appropriately because that's not working. And you know, this has a knock-on effect. This has a knock-on effect on how you manage them. And if we stick with the dementia point, this is where, you know, long-term care stuff comes in. You know, we have a fabulous system of cradle to grave NHS, and you know, it's an amazing thing. And you know, but what the NHS is really good at is patching you up and going, you're sick, you've got a broken leg, excellent, stick you in plaster, off you go. The NHS does not have the space to do the care, does not have the space to do the social care. And like it or not, the reality of the situation is the NHS is free at the point of delivery. Social care is not. And if you've got people who do not fall under the remit of the NHS, then there is a very good chance that person is going to need to pay for their care one way or another. And this often comes as a real shock to people, because you know, they're sort of like, well, I paid all my taxes all my life, you know, I don't want to do this. What do you mean I've got to pay this? Because there is a clear distinction between NHS. If it's health rated, it's free at the point of delivery. If it is not, then it is social care, and social care is means tested. So if we go back to the analogy of, so, you know, dad's got dementia, dad's had a fall, he's in hospital with a broken hip. While he's in hospital having his hip pinned, that's fine. The NHS covers it. It covers the heating, the lighting, the accommodation, the care, food. But as soon as he is deemed physically able to get out, whether that, you know, rightly or wrongly, you might disagree with that, they'll go, well, he can go now, but he needs to go into social care, either go home or go into a home, and that will start to cost money. So very briefly rattling through the way the care fees works, if you're so sick, and the reason you need care is because the NHS is because of your health, the NHS will pay for it, whether in hospital or in a another setting. It's called NHS continuing healthcare funding. It's really hard to get. It does exist, but it's incredibly hard to get. So often you'll find that people, you know, aren't eligible, or haven't, you know, been told, no, you can't have it. So, you know, this is where people like me go, well, actually, you know, maybe we should challenge that. So, you know, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but you know, it's definitely worth doing. I mean, we did one once, and husband and wife had been told she had to pay £1,600 a week for her husband's care. NHS assessment hadn't been done. We got it done, and they went, oh yeah, sorry, he is eligible. So we go from a £1,600 a week care bill to zero.
Wow.
6 weeks out of hospital, you get what's called reablement or rehabilitation, and that's free. So you can, somebody might go to like a care home for 6 weeks while they just get back on their feet. But after that, pretty much, if you need care and support, you're paying for it. And the way it currently stands, if you've got assets over £23,250, then you're paying for your care in full. If your assets fall below 23,250, then you will still be paying a contribution towards your care fees. And it's only when the capital has gone down to 14,250 will the state step in.
It's nothing, is it?
It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And, you know, it's that. And the way it works is, it's the way the fees work, it's attached to the person who needs the care. So you might have a husband and wife, you know, well, husband's always had stuff in his name, wife hasn't got anything, and they'll go, well, he's got a load of money, so that's all right. So he's deemed to be assessed for care. So again, another really important conversation to be having is, actually, are these genuinely your assets, or are they joint assets, or should they be looked at as jointly? And very much a case of understanding that. People are really concerned about selling the house for when care arises on the horizon. And yes, okay, if you've got a husband and wife, both of them are over 60 and one of them's still living at home and the other one's in a care home, then they will ignore the value of the house. So far, so good. What you don't want to happen, though, is the person who's at home dies and the person who's in the care home suddenly inherits the whole house, because that will go. So that does go back to my point about sort of, you know, sorting out your wills. And, you know, there are ways and means of doing it. But, you know, there's this notion that, you know, care is going to get funded. It's just not. And, you know, I think that really is a big problem for a lot of people. And, you know, we've had our wonderful announcement from our illustrious Prime Minister saying, it's fine, don't worry, we're going to do a care cap.
And then sort it out, magic wand.
Yeah. Perfect. And then everybody go, oh, great. All I'm going to have to do is pay £86,000 towards my care. And I went, okay, hang on. Let's just read the small print, because that's the important bit. So, yes, you will only pay £86,000 for your care cap. What does that mean? That means that somebody from the local authority has to come and assess you, and it has to establish what your care needs are and that you need care. And then the clock will start ticking. So, you know, somebody has to have a carer come in twice a day, half an hour a day, out, you know, or, you know, hour a day tops. Then your care clock starts ticking. It doesn't take into account accommodation. It doesn't take into account food, what they call hotel costs. So if you're going into a care home, and, you know, to give you a sort of a back of a fag packet kind of analysis, it's like a residential care home will cost you roughly £1,000 a week, and then a nursing home might cost £1,500 a week. The percentage of those two figures that actually relates to the care is quite small. Because actually what it relates to, well, I've got the heating, I've got the overhead, I've got the lighting, I've got got all this still has to be paid for, calling them the hotel costs. So, you know, I did a bit of a sort of, you know, as far as we can analysis. I think, you know, it will take about 6 years for somebody to hit the care cap, but they will have spent a huge amount of money on the other stuff. So it is not this magic bullet that we were all promised. And really understanding that if care comes knocking, then somebody is paying for it. And I say, look, as a lawyer, there's certain things I can do. I can challenge people to make sure that they do the NHS funding, you know, that's been looked at properly. I can make sure that we structure assets perhaps in a way that is appropriate. So talking about wills, you know, we make sure that the person who's in a care home isn't likely to inherit, because what's the point? Things like that. Making sure that people, you know, that when people are assessed as to what the value of their assets are, that is correct, that assets that shouldn't have been taken into account aren't. So jointly owned property, you know, you can't sell half a house, you can't sell a quarter of a business, you know, or, you know, business premises, you know, business, you know, slightly different. So I can do legal challenges on this sort of basis, but there will come a point where I'll go, well, you know, I've done my bit. You now have a care bill of X pounds a week. I'm out. You know, go and talk to Coreena. You know, so really, I think it's going to be really important that going forward, that people really understand that, you know, there's no magic bullet. There is no, you know, there is no easy solution to this. Giving away assets is deliberate deprivation. The local authorities are getting much hotter on that because they're strapped for cash and they're like, well, why should we pay? And yes, the earlier you can plan, the better your chances of mitigating care fees. There are certainly things we can do in a crisis, but like everything, it takes time. And, you know, it's people get exhausted. So the more you can do early on to get your toolkit in place, the better. And understanding, you know, who's on your side, who's on your team, you know, who do you need to know, or who needs to know this is happening, so we can, you know, pull the levers and start this conversation and dialogue going. So I think, you know, this is a huge area. I mean, it's you know, it's hard going, because nobody wants to think about it. Nobody wants to see their loved ones go through it. Nobody wants to think about dying, but actually it could be a lot worse if you don't think about it. So being brave, ripping that plaster off, having the conversation early and sitting down and going, look, well, let's do this, let's get this in place, will actually make a massive difference down the line. And, you know, and ultimately, we all want a peaceful life, don't we? We don't want to be sort of, you know, scared and frightened and, you know, being pushed around by the authorities, and, you know, even when they're doing their absolute level best to, you know, in very difficult circumstances, because nobody's sitting there going, we want to be difficult, but this is, you know, you have to pay. And, you know, there was reading the news the other day that, you know, somebody had been in hospital for 6 months because there was nobody to do the assessment for her to go home. And quite rightly, somebody pointed out, well, if she'd had an independent assessment, she'd have got out in a couple of days. So it's understanding, you know, there is help out there. Yes, it might cost money, but in reality, it might save you in long term a huge amount more, both financially and emotionally in heartbreak.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I'm conscious that's a really sort of, you know, rapid
That's brilliant, though. I mean, it's
through.
Like you say, it's a massive area that you can't really sort of condense into half an hour. But I guess it's just really to pick out on some of the important bits, really. Yeah. And for me, Heledd, you know, I think there was a couple of really important bits that I took from it. I mean, one of them was the power of attorney. There's not only doing the document, it's actually getting the team, that, you know, the financial advisor, everyone that you deal with, you know, getting to know the ins and outs of the bits that you'll be helping with while that person is able to talk to you about it. I think that's crucial.
Absolutely.
And also structuring the property. A lot of people don't realise that you can structure the property in a slightly different way, so that, you know, if one person's in a care home, they don't all of a sudden inherit 100% of the value of a property. I think that's key as well. So thank you, that's brilliant. I'm really pleased with that. And like you say, it's not something you can easily put into a 100 you know, sort of 30-minute presentation, but you know, thank you for that. I mean, obviously we're going to do a couple of Q&As now, so if anyone's got any questions, please hover over the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We have had a few come in already, and also I've got a couple from people who weren't able to make it tonight. So what I'll do then is I'll just go through a couple of the ones that we've had come in beforehand first. So one of them is come in regarding someone's mother-in-law. So apparently mother-in-law is showing signs of memory loss but hasn't actually made a lasting power of attorney yet. Is it likely to cause a problem?
Yes, so you can only make a power of attorney when you have capacity, because you are delegating decision making. If you do not appoint somebody, the only way to get access to finances is to apply to the court, which is taking about a year at the moment to get court orders. And you know, in the meantime, everything's frozen. And you know, whether that's direct debits going out, whether that's, you know, pension payments that aren't coming in because people won't pay them, you know, because it's somebody who's vulnerable. Yeah, so really getting the power of attorney, it's one of those things that people say, oh, I'll wait till I've lost it. Well, no, that actually is too late. You have to do it before capacity is lost.
Fair enough. Yeah, makes perfect sense. So so another one then is that's come in is would it be more beneficial, and I know we've not covered this, but would it be more beneficial to apply for a DPA, so a deferred payment agreement, for anyone that's not sure of what that is, to pay the fees for my mother's care, or would it be better for me to pay her care fees and then get the money back once her property's sold? So I mean, I'll let you just explain what a DPA is, if that's okay.
No, absolutely. So a DPA, deferred payment, is where somebody owns a property and for reasons that, you know, they may not be, they don't want to sell it, or they want to try and keep it in the family, because this stuff is time sensitive. We just don't know how long somebody might have. So family might be dead keen to keep it in the family because it's of sentimental value, and they'll go, well, you know, let's just let the care fees ratchet up against the house, like a mortgage, and then it will get paid off down the line. So it can be helpful for people to have that option, because it gives people a bit of breathing space. It means that later on, let's say the market might be more favourable, or somebody might be able to buy, you know, get a mortgage and pay off that money, or you know, so they're definitely worth exploring if there's a property and there's a good reason for keeping it as a property, rather than just selling it and investing it, which, you know, for a lot of people is actually less hassle. It's less hassle to, you know, sell the property, because you're not then sort of dealing with maintenance and the ongoing, you know, insurance and heating and lighting and all that, particularly if the property's empty. If you're going to be a landlord, if you're going to think, well, I'll rent the property out, at least there's an income coming in, but you've got all that sort of associated work with being a landlord, of making sure you've got all your certificates in place, and you know, you've got, you know, no guarantee you're going to have tenants. So they're definitely worth looking at, and I think, you know, people need to know that they're there. But I think it is very much case by case basis, you know, why, you know, what's the merit in keeping the house as opposed to selling it and, you know, having the money available.
That's fair enough. So we've had a couple of questions come in regarding power of attorneys. So the first one then that's come in is who would make financial and health decisions on my behalf should I not have a power of attorney in place? And how would my family make these important decisions if there's no power of attorney in place?
Okay, so if there's no power of attorney in place and health decisions need to be made, those decisions have to be made in best interests, whatever best interests might be. So what you might conceive as something you want is not necessarily what other people might conceive they want. So a really good example of this, and it's a really tragic sort of court case, but I think it really, really sums up for me why a health power of attorney is really important. Chap who, ex-army, police officer, so, you know, fit and healthy, hale and hearty, going to work on his motorbike one morning, gets knocked off his bike by a driver, and he's rushed to hospital, and, you know, they do a great job on patching him up. But he's one layer above a coma, so, you know, so it's persistent vegetative state, and his wife and his mum and his sister goes, switch it off. Because it's not what he wanted. We've had this discussion, I don't know how many times, you know, he's been in the army, he's seen this, he's a police officer, he's seen all this, and he's always been adamant he didn't want this to happen. If it happened to him, he didn't want it to be the case. The medical professional, on the other hand, goes, yeah, but we're not comfortable with that. We're not comfortable with switching him off because we don't know where he's going to be. Is he, you know, he's never going to be back where he was. But he might, you know, he said, you know, it's things, they were down to things like, well, actually, if you change the lights in the room, there's a change in, you know, response on the machines. So we're not entirely comfortable with switching the machine off. So everybody goes to court as to, should we turn off the machine? And his family went, please, please, please switch this off. This is we're speaking for him.
They know him, yeah.
And the judge says in the judgment, he went, had there been a power of attorney in place, we wouldn't be here, because it would have just been done by now.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, for me, huge.
So on that then, another one that's come in is regarding enduring power of attorney, which is the older style. So someone said that they've got enduring power of attorney. Is there anything in particular that they need to consider, given that they've changed now to a lasting power of attorney?
So they know. So if you pre-1st of October 2007, it was enduring power of attorney, lasting powers of attorney post 1st of October 2007. So, you know, they've been in for quite some time now. Enduring powers of attorney, EPAs, don't cover health at all. So they are just financial. And again, depending on the situation, it's whether people like yourself are able to use the EPA for the discretionary fund management type things, because there would have been no reason to put the clause in pre 2017,
right? Okay.
When the Office of the Public Guardian, who are the body that look after powers of attorney, decided in their infinite wisdom that these clauses should be included. So an EPA, yes, they're still valid, but they might not be fit for purpose. And they might not cover all the things that people, consider important. Things have moved on.
No, that's fair enough. Okay. All right. Another one that's come in then is, no, you're not able to give your house away if you're still getting benefit from it. But my brother-in-law still lives at home. Could his parents gift him part of the house, given they are still living there? And if so, is there anything they would need to be aware of?
So I guess, is it something that he's never going to leave home? It's his property. If they die, then he would inherit at that point. So why not make that gift during lifetime? He'd become a co-owner. There's a risk from an inheritance tax perspective that, you've got to have your 7-year clock running if you're giving away gifts. And also, if you're giving away your property with the intention of avoiding care fees, then that's hard to defend. How do they work it out? They'll sit there and go, well, you've had a stroke, you've broken your hip, you've got dementia, you're pretty likely to need care. But actually, in a scenario where you've got family living together and you want to protect that person, then yes, there is obviously logic and sense in doing that. So I think it's case by case basis, making sure that is done at the right time, making sure that any paperwork behind the scenes, so if there is a will, that if you've got 2 children and you're giving one a share of the house, making sure perhaps you adjust any monies that are passing around. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth, if you've got somebody who's living at home who would be vulnerable without this, it's definitely worth looking into.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. So, I mean, I'm conscious there's a couple of questions that we haven't had a chance to answer, but obviously if anyone, hasn't had their question answered, I'll try and send around some Q&A stuff afterwards. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Heledd. It was absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It's a very tricky subject to try and condense, as we've discussed. So there's probably a lot of questions that may have sort of cropped up in people's minds. And obviously, if anyone has any further questions, either for me or for Heledd, then please do get in touch and we can give you the right contact details. There will be a recording available as well, so for anyone who wants to watch it again or share it with any of their contacts or family members, then we will be sending out a recording, and it will be going on our website as well. So if you've obviously got any queries or questions regarding that, then get in touch. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to listen to myself and Heledd. It's very gratefully appreciated. And thank you again to Heledd for your words of wisdom on a Wednesday evening.
Thank you very much.
All the best to everyone.